Welcome to Mental Healthy, the podcast where we share stories of the professionals and experts worldwide working in the mental health field. Here's your host, Dr. Kenyon Knapp.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Mental Healthy Podcast. I'm glad to have you with us here today. I got some great guests with me here today, Dr. José Maldonado and Dr. Adrianne Johnson. I'm glad to have you with us here today.
Thank you for that welcome. Of course.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I know you both a little bit, but the listeners may not. So could you maybe introduce yourselves to the listeners a little bit and a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Well, my name is Dr. José Miguel Maldonado, and I'm a faculty member in the School of Behavioral Sciences. I'm a professor of counselor education, and consistent with today's topic, one of my research areas is studying Latino communities in general, but more specifically, Latinx communities in college and higher education. So thank you. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Dr. Johnson?
Yes. So I am an associate professor at Wright State University in Ohio, and I'm also a practitioner of clinical mental health counseling in the community. And I've been doing both since 2007, and I've come across a lot of opportunities to talk about the really important issues of mental health in various populations. And so when I had this opportunity to work with Dr. Maldonado, I was honored to do so, and that's what brings me here.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm so grateful to have both of you here today. And the listeners would be happy to know that just this year, 2024, you both published a book together, Latinx College Students, Innovations in Mental Health Advocacy and Social Justice Programs. And it's an edited book, which is really cool. So there's other people sharing as well. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
Absolutely, Dean Knapp. So first and foremost, I want to thank you for supporting my academic freedom, including this current research on Latinx college student communities. I think initially we hope that this textbook and in the various ways we introduce transformative practices and awareness of mental health challenges. I think even before talking about Latino men in college and higher education institutions, we first have to talk about men in general. And according to the Chronicle of Higher Education, as recently as 2021, we find that, at least that they indicate, that all men of all cultural identities are declining and vastly outnumbered in the nation's colleges and universities. They clearly identify declining numbers of overall enrollments from 16 to 25% across colleges and universities. And, throughout my life, I've been studying research areas that reflect my own experience. So this is really kind of like a lifelong, like a bucket list type work. And, our hope in coming together, I think Dr. Johnson and I are both about empowerment and about, really raising awareness regarding marginalized communities. I would say that the book really reflects on my college experiences and mostly the mental health challenges that even I faced, the unique challenges, both positive and negative. Early in my career, I noticed that I was often only the only Latino student in most of my classes. So, this kind of propelled just the thought and just looking around, even through my early journey in education, and even in my current experiences, we find that, again, just men in general, it's called, they term it as like the vanishing male in higher education. And it's even worse for Latino men. And one of the main reasons that, we wrote and we brought in some really good authors ranging from student affairs professionals to deans of schools, and even two of our own, Dean Knapp, Dr. Basti Holston, Dr. Zoricelis Davila, to really talk about our main goal, which is to advocate and to create awareness about the retention of Latinx, and Latinx means young adult communities, young adult Latino communities and Latina communities that consider mental health practices in order to support them from a culturally inclusive approach. Our goal is to really advocate and create awareness around the retention of Latinx college students and integrate supportive programs that address the external barriers. I think that's one of the keys that we also wanted to emphasize, and a lot of our authors really communicated that, and that was very transparent in their writing, that we want to promote practical strategies. We want to create awareness around mental health programs, supportive programs that collectively recognize the marginalization of Latinx communities, but also more specifically Latinx men. And this is like an advocacy textbook that really draws attention to that. And that's what we wanted to do. That's our main goal, and it's being received very well. And again, I just thank you for supporting my academic freedom to really study these areas as a professor, and really to just expand on this and continue to talk about it and raise that awareness.
Well, you touched on a lot of different things there. Of course, you covered really the reasons for writing the book. And then you started to get into some of the issues that Latinx students deal with. You mentioned some of the barriers and the marginalizations. But what are some of the issues that you have seen through the research you did for this book, or maybe experiences you've had with students? Like, what are the issues they struggle with?
Well, I think first and foremost, the sense of belonging, I think, is one of the main components of particularly Latinx men. Their sense of belonging to college and universities at the very foundation is just looking around and finding that around in the classrooms, in the college, there's a sense of loss. There's a missing piece in terms of their sense of belonging, which in fact creates significant mental health converging issues from experiences of discrimination, experiences of being marginalized because of their identity. And, this impacts their mental health and their retention, of course, So I think at the very foundation of it, we wanted to first identify these issues and know that this is a different population. This is a population that requires a cultural framework that is able to recognize some of these challenges and know that at the very beginning, that sense of belonging is missing. And we wanted to bring in just experts and knowledgeable people that are in higher education to talk about it, to really find how can we close the gap? How can we create an environment for Latinx men, young adults, Latinas, to really fortify their sense of belonging, to not feel marginalized, to be included in every aspect of the higher education experience. And, if you read throughout the textbook and the chapters, you'll note specific statistics, percentages that really indicate, there's a significant problem here. And I think the way that we look at it as counselor educators and as mental health clinicians, we wanted to put the attention in that area and say, first, we recognize there is a problem here. Beyond the numbers and the statistics that we've seen, we know that we wanted to dismantle this. We wanted to collectively together, really unite on this topic because we want more Latino men to continue to pursue their college education. But most importantly, provide transformative practices within higher education programs that support that ideal. That there is a direct connection between student affairs professionals, that provide, again, culturally informed, culturally inclusive practices, counseling strategies, supportive programs that first say, we recognize you as a Latino man, we recognize you as a Latina female student. We know that your cultural identity is different than others. It carries a lot of significance, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a little while, but we know that there are cultural values that maybe other mental health clinicians and college personnel and supportive staff don't know in general. So I think the book also speaks to understanding the converging factors that impact if a Latino male is confirms his or her sense of belonging in the university, and if not, what are some of the mental health issues that come out of that, and how do we address them? So I think faculty in general, counselor education faculty in general, may recognize that, but because this is such a contemporary issue, and we see the numbers, and we see men are preferring not to go to college just in general, and it becomes more severe, distressing for Latino men because of this situation. So I don't know if I answered your question in its entirety, but I think that's the basis of where we were coming from.
I think the other piece too, just to build on that, is the lived experiences that our authors brought to the book. We include so much relevant research and recent trends on Latino males and their transition to college and through college. And yet so many pieces of data that are out there that are relevant still don't include that lived experience, that real in vivo experience of identifying barriers and solutions in the higher academic environment. And in identifying those barriers, we need to understand first our interpretation of many of the terminologies that we see in our book, including machismo. When we look at colonialization and the white dominant approach to education, we look at machismo as being something that is bad. And when we as practitioners understand that machismo is a cultural component and that it is something that must be embraced and explored and addressed in the educational environment to bring out the best in our students and to make sure that our environment is learner driven with a cultural consideration in that space.
Absolutely. Can I sort of piggyback on one of those statements you made earlier? A minute ago, Dr. Maldonado, you mentioned that transformative practices in higher education programs that can help with belonging for Latinx students. What are some of the transformative practices that higher ed institutions could do that would help with a sense of belonging for Latinx students?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you'll see this, Dr. Knapp, across universities, not only Liberty University, but other universities nationwide, where there are specialized programs that are designed, are identified as, say, for example, and I know you've had this experience, Dr. Johnson, where there are programs embedded in the university that, like, for example, women's empowerment program, Latinx student organizations, Latinx places, programs that are designed specifically that are directed towards, again, validating the mental health challenges that they face, but also fostering that these programs foster a validation of their experiences, their resilience, their empowerment, and transformation in the sense that they're labeled in this way, that they're identified in this way, and they're embedded in the university whole wide. So we don't see this, right? And although there's some, but what we're doing, I think, is advocating for more transformative practices by way of programs, by way of that address the support system, that includes counselors that are directly impacting with their culturally inclusive mental health counseling approaches to support specifically Latinx students. And, we look around and we see very few, right? We see some, but we need more. So we're using our voices, collective voices, to say, we understand that there are some universities that promote programs that are specifically designed to help Latinx students, given the overwhelming external issues that they face, from discrimination to the complexity. Here in Texas, where I live, where we won't even touch on the surface of the issues regarding immigration, undocumented students, and how do we really address these, and how do we promote transformative programs that address this marginalization from an inclusive and empowerment approach. While again, I think that Dr. Johnson and I, we agree on many things, but we don't agree on everything, right? And but we come together in the sense that we support various ways that we can teach. Also, there's a teaching component to this, where we can help not only counsel educators, but mostly student affairs professionals to foster an environment of cultural humility, inclusion, resilience. And I think that's the basis of what we're saying in terms of transformative practices. We recognize the reality of what's happening to Latinx students nationwide in terms of their pursuit for higher education. But we also know that we need more. We need more, and that's what we're using our collective voices to put attention on this and say, we're doing some things, but we need to do more. And I think that is transformational. And just talking about it and thinking about it and creating awareness about it is transformational in a sense as well.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think when we talk about transformations, we tend to think big because we're academics, we're higher education professionals and administrators and counselors. But one transformational practice that we all can do without even trying very hard is to connect with our students, connect with our learners, and connect our learners with groups that understand their cultural values. Getting Latinx males and Latinx communities connected with groups on campus that understand them and that can identify them and challenge them and excite them, that's going to keep them in college. That is going to be a protective resiliency factor for them to graduate and get employment in the field of their choosing. And so what faculty can do and what counselors and administrators can do is connect with their students and then foster those relationships out on campus. And so when we're looking at transformation, we're looking at social community, we're looking at connectiveness. And that's really where we wanted to push some of those transformational practices throughout the book and look at the ways that we can empower ourselves to empower our students.
Yeah, why are men in general vanishing from higher education, from colleges? That's the first question.
Yes.
And why are Latino men vanishing at even more significant rates?
I think so.
We're questioning that. I think we're saying, we're posing a lot of questions, but we're also saying, collectively, this is a situation that we're facing, and how are administrators positively making changes in the university as a whole to address this? There's a reason why admission rates, Latino men applying to college, staying in college, and actually graduating, there's a reason they're not there. Okay, so why are they not there? Yeah. What are we doing as universities to transform that dynamic? There's a lot of questions here, I think, also in the textbook that we haven't answered yet. And I think that's one of the other primary reasons why we wrote this book, to note, like, there's a wide community of concerned persons that work as administrators and counsel educators and mental health clinicians to say, why is this a problem, and what can we do to change this? And I think that's hopefully that addresses that question that you have.
Yeah. Well, I tell you, forgive me, I haven't had a chance to read the whole book yet, but you're raising a great point. I mean, you're right. I mean, like the percentage of men and numbers are going down, and then of course they're low for Latinx men as well. And I know you, as academics, you both speak from research and all that, but I'm sure the listeners here are going, well, tell me why. Tell me why. So what theories or research do you have that answer that question? Like, why are there so few Latinx men in higher education right now?
Well, yeah, I can just, as I mentioned, Dr. Knapp, in the beginning, I have a personal connection to this topic. And for me, as a Latino man, as a Latino faculty, all throughout my college experience, a lot of what is depicted in the textbook in terms of mental health challenges, external factors of marginalization, have been alive and present in my own experience. So as Dr. Johnson expressed earlier, the lived experiences, at least for me, have been pretty significant. There's so many times where I have felt alone. I have felt, there's a complexity in all of the mental health issues, but to summarize, I haven't felt that sense of belonging. I think probably more significantly early on in breaking barriers. I'm the first to ever go to college in my family. In fact, given my cultural identity, I was not even supposed to be in college, right? I was supposed to be out there working. And better yet, going into counseling, which is totally contrary to my cultural value as being a Latino man. Latino men are, at least from a cultural framework, are not relational. We're not to be expressing our emotions and feelings. So all of these things together, I think for me, really spoke to my lived experiences and the impact that I wanted to make with this textbook and with this transformational project, to know that there are people like me that have recognized the mental health challenges, the marginalization, but also didn't stay there, right? Didn't stay stuck there.
Yeah.
I'm a proponent of I recognize what's happening, but I also am a firm believer in empowerment, right? As I mentioned earlier, how do we jump off this and get to a place where we can take maybe my own example, and say, look, this is a Latino young adult, a man who has, not to, but has broken barriers, right? Because again, as I mentioned, all throughout my college experience, and even as a faculty, beyond my work at Liberty University and other universities that I worked at, I look around and I'm the only one. So that's a lonely experience. That's an experience that I want to make better for other Latino men that are considering coming back to college and saying, I'm going to do this because other people have been doing it. Not as many as I would hope, but that's the legacy that I would like to leave, and to really open for other Latino men who can identify with me and say, wow, look, this is how many times have I heard from young Latino students, young Latino boys, Latina girls, wow, you're the first person that I've ever seen in this spot, right, in this position. And I take that very seriously, right? I'm not a college president, but I've overcome so much. I grew up in the housing projects, filled with violence, substance abuse, lowered expectations. I think that's another big one. That was embedded in my mindset, and I had to overcome that. I had to push through that, and that's, I think, what we want to say here is that some part of what we want to say is like we recognize this is the current situation, but there's so many stories of using that experience of marginalization and then jumping right into how do I empower myself? How do I create an environment where this can be the norm, right? You can see many Maldonados around. You can see more of them, and that's a great thing. That's a thing that I believe like we should celebrate. We should work towards, right? So that's my self-actualization
Yeah.
from this book, right? So yeah.
I
Well,
think that thread of advocacy really shines through in the book as well. Dr. Maldonado is coming from a rich lived experience from the Latino perspective. And he's been through so much. He's encountered barriers. He's seen opportunities. He's worked with students who have been in a position he has been in himself. And so when we did this book, we thought, how can we actually channel advocacy and empowerment into our readership? How can we get people excited about this subject and feeling like they can make a difference in learners' lives?
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, when you're talking about your self-actualization, Dr. Maldonado, let me ask this, and maybe this isn't, well, it's different, but I've been a professor type for over 25 years now, and I've worked for a number of state universities and all that, where I would go into some places and I was like the only overt Christian there. And I also felt very lonely and sort of isolated. Like on some level, I really don't relate to these people. Um, but now I'm here at this, this really big Christian college where we both work,
Yes.
and so now I'm sort of in my little tribe or whatever you whatever you want to call it. For you as a Latinx man, how do you balance your sense of belonging as a Christian man, but also as a Latinx man working at a place like Liberty? Like, because I know you have some sense of belonging or sense of identity from both, but how do you balance that, or get
Um,
belonging from either one?
yeah. Well, first, I certainly thank my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ for being the path and the light to my journey. And I think that it's been conflict, like converging multiple identities, I would say.
Hmm.
And my own spirituality has been a part of that.
Hmm.
And recognizing that even within the framework of Latinx and Latin values, spirituality is at the forefront. It's at the
Hmm.
center. It's one of our core values.
Uh-huh.
So it wasn't as a significant, issue. Obviously, at Liberty University, we have the full expression where we can express our
Yeah.
alignment with Christianity, but it was very different working in secular universities where um, people didn't automatically know that I was Christian, but they automatically saw that I was a Latino.
Hmm.
And it was probably much easier for me in that sense of spirituality and Christianity because I gave my life to Jesus in the Yogi Bear Ministries very early on in my life. Uh, yeah, I do face marginalization, I think, because of it, but it's not probably so easily recognizable and identifiable as your experience, Dean Knapp, where you were working as a professor in secular universities, but your Christian identity probably didn't come through until you said, "Hey, I'm a Christian," or "This is who I am." Uh, uh, Comparatively,
It's not visible for me, I guess.
right, right.
Yeah.
And for
Yeah.
me, it's more visible
Hmm.
and validating because it's part of my cultural framework, right?
Hmm.
I grew up very early on. My parents were more aligned probably with Catholic, right? We were Catholic. I
Hmm.
was born,
Yeah.
raised, yeah, Catholic. And then I kind of broke off, and I began to, in Brooklyn, New York City, there was a ministry called Yogi Bear Ministries. And it was like, I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but buses came around the housing projects and collected all the kids, and we went to a place, and that was the first time, that I felt the love of Jesus, right? So for me, it was pretty remarkable. And but I do get a sense of, like, when I was working at universities that are not named Liberty University, where these parts of my identity were not affirmed. In fact, they were in total opposition, right? So there was, I don't want to say restraint, because if you had personal conversations with me, I would, express that and be okay with it. But it was not validated. In fact, it was something that was bad, given the fact that, it's just two different ways, right? Secular university and Christian university. Secular universities really are, I would even say, just maybe opposed or just not inclusive to that part of a person's identity, at least mine. And so I had to keep that, I wouldn't say hidden, I would say more not freely expressed, right? But people know, again, if you look at a lot of the research, religion, spirituality is a core value. So, that's kind of the way that I navigated those converging factors, right? And sometimes very opposing in more secular universities rather than Liberty.
What's interesting is in my role, I deal with a lot of accreditations in the different mental health fields. And in some of the newer accreditation standards, they're starting to use the word belonging in the accreditation standards. And they're encouraging institutions to make efforts to make different groups feel a sense of belonging, which I know that's somewhat of a subjective thing, but you can at least make efforts as institutions. What are some of the major support systems and advocacy programs that you're aware of that are designed for Latinx college students to maybe help them have that sense of belonging?
I would say that programs specifically designed, I think you're going to find them in universities that are progressive, right? Progressive in the sense that there's a foundation of advocacy kind of embedded all throughout the theme of the university, where there is a recognition and a validation of cultural identity all throughout the university, not just mainly in specialized programs, but in the philosophy of the university, what they aspire to. So that trickles down all through administration, all through programming, faculty, professors. I mean, I have colleagues that work at Wright State University, right? I have colleagues all over East Coast. I mean, I'm in Texas now, but I'm from Jersey. I'm from New York City, right? So what we can clearly say what that part of the country is all about, which is progressiveness and really emphasizing the part of social justice and advocacy for marginalized communities. It's embedded in, so I think you're going to see a lot of programs in those universities that are directly impacting this part of a student's identity. And then hence comes the programming which I mentioned earlier, like specialized, not even programs, but persons that are trained in a cultural framework. I think in many of my courses at Liberty, I talk about that. I not only in that one multicultural counseling class, but embedded in all of my courses is that theme of how do we recognize the cultural frameworks of not only Latinx communities, but women, Black Americans, Irish Americans, just the whole wide array. And I think that's instrumental. And we need more of that. I think that the training components of counselor education, you spoke about accreditation. We're just breaking, I think, the barrier now, in my opinion, at Liberty University, where there's a focus now on recognition of cultural identity. And it starts with the training mechanism. I know that I have, as a counselor educator, a significant role in teaching the counselors that are graduating from Liberty to help them understand that, to help them understand these factors of cultural identity, which I believe, primarily missing. We can't do it in one course. It has to be spread all throughout. So in addition to the programming that you mentioned, I think counselor education in general, and having gone through the CACREP accreditation process with you, Dean Knapp, we have to provide examples of this, right? In order to gain accreditation, we have to, and I think it begins with our teaching pedagogy and our philosophy of education and what we believe counseling students need in order to be successful, not only with, for example, like Christian communities, but to widen that counseling framework to be very inclusive to all communities, not only Latinx, but all communities. And I think that that's really important, like in the teaching mechanism and in our philosophy as counselor educators, teaching mental health counselors and school counselors, like this is important. And you're going to be way more effective if you recognize and integrate these pedagogies in your counseling approach rather than not including them. And I think that's key as well. There's programs which are effective, but I think we need to do more. And just from our perspective as clinical mental health and counselor educators, we need to do more to help our students. We had a thing which is kind of a norm in my approach, where typically in a multicultural counseling class, we talk about different cultures, we talk about Latinos, we talk about other communities, but what can we do to help a person go outside of their comfort zone, to challenge their bias, to challenge the stereotypes that we see every day manifested in our society? How do we put our students in a position of uncomfortability so that they can recognize their fear, they can recognize their bias, and then the next step, which is equally as important, begin to dismantle that. Dismantle that, because if we don't do that, we just continue, I think, reinforcing those stereotypes, and that is critical. At the end of the line, it's dangerous. It's not what we want, and it's not what we aspire to as counselors working in schools, communities. The society in general is like a microcosm of like what we deal with every day, right? So I often, again, in my approach, I look at real issues. I look at, I just don't go theory. I go, okay, so what's happening in the world? What's happening here? What's happening there? Like, so I think that's critically important for counselor educators and mental health clinicians.
A minute ago, you all mentioned something about the undocumented people in the country and things like that. And I know, given that, we're coming up on an election here in America right now, and then all the stuff in the news about people coming to America through the southern border and all that. How does the political climate of undocumented students, or specifically Latinx communities, impact their mental health or their wellness when it comes to them going to college?
Yeah, I would say it deteriorates, right? So as the political climate in the United States intensifies, which is what I see here in Texas, due to the current status of undocumented students, border towns, sanctuary cities, students pursuing education are thrust into the complexity of understanding these external factors. we could say, there's multiple sides of this. There are, of course, clearly advocates for um, helping immigrant communities. There's legislation. There are things that universities are doing to help understand the psychological impact of an undocumented identity or of an immigrant identity. And we see this, I think I see this more closely now, just being in Texas for the last few years. There is a psychological impact on that, right? So when people hear undocumented and hear border towns and all of this, it communicates, at least for a person who might, or a young person who might, a Latin person who might be hearing this, what they hear is, you're not welcome. No, and college access is not so readily available for these individuals. I think what we try to, and there is a specific chapter on this, Dean Knapp, in the textbook that addresses the complexity of all of these factors. But I think what we're saying collectively is that we recognize there is a psychological and a traumatic experience of persons that have come over the border, right, are undocumented, or identify as an immigrant community. And we know that this is can be traumatic, and it can be impact their psychological and mental health. And this is, like removing all the political rhetoric and political stuff on the side, right? We know that that exists and it's very powerful, but I think our attention is like, how can we understand psychologically what that means for a Latinx person, and how do we help them, right? In a sense that they can understand their identity and then grow from it, and then, kind of transcend and know that this is not a barrier. This is something that can propel you into excellence, into resilience. We all have our backgrounds, and I think just talking about that undocumented status, that immigrant identity, just in a sense, like from a societal perspective, it's a bad thing. But so we know that, and even in my visits to Eagle Pass, and I was down in Uvalde when that crisis happened with the school shooting. Just hearing the stories, right? Just listening and understanding that there's a lot that we can do to improve the psychological care. And I think that's probably my perspective. I don't know, Dr. Johnson, if you might have a different opinion, but from my perspective, it's like more about how do we look at the individual. Like, I'm a big believer in Carl Rogers, right? Like looking at the individual in its whole entirety, like, and that whole idea of self-actualization and empowerment. Like, this is your situation today, but how can we, and we haven't even touched upon the acculturation and the assimilation issues that are quite present for these communities. So in my visit to Eagle Pass and visit to more the southern states, I'm in San Antonio, but the further you go down, you start to see that more and more. And from a healthy perspective, I've seen it also from a positive side here in Texas, where there have been so many stories of success from individuals that have come from these communities that how can you not notice that? How can you not build upon that, right? Again, this is aside from all of the political stuff, which, it's impactful, but I kind of look at it more as a counselor educator, as an advocate for good mental care, no matter the community where you come from.
Absolutely. And that's the undercurrent of what we do as practitioners, as faculty, as leaders, as Christians. We meet our clients where they're at. We meet our students where they're at, and our peers, our colleagues. And so when we are talking with anyone from the Latinx community. We need to do so from a position of cultural humility and compassion, because compassion mobilizes after trauma, after tragedy. And we have seen this time and time again. It started with this election where people are really looking at this, and it's polarizing. And what Dr. Maldonado and I have talked about at length is that there's a lot of passion here on every side, and that passion can be used to mobilize services and transformative practices. There is so much we can do just by looking at these issues that are now on everyone's mind. There's nowhere we can't go with this. And so it's a very traumatic time for our country. And it's a very traumatic time for anyone looking at these issues vicariously, traumatically. But we're doing something about it. We're doing the work. And I think that our textbook shows that. Our authors came together and said, we've got some issues we need to confront here. Let's do it in a way that is empowering for our readers. And so as Dr. Maldonado was sharing his experience, I kind of was taken aback at how powerful we are when we have these experiences and we decide to do something powerful about it and give back to our learning community.
Absolutely. Well, let me jump to probably one final question, and then after that, I always ask everyone, what else did you come here today that you wanted to share that you didn't have a chance to share? My catch-all question at the end. But let me ask you, just respecting your time, what are the future trends that you see in regards to Latinx mental health and transformative practices in university settings? Not necessarily here at Liberty or Wright State, but maybe nationwide that you're hearing about that are helpful for Latinx students.
Yeah, absolutely, DNAP. We want this textbook to have a lot of takeaways for counselors, for counselor educators, for university staff. And I think first, the textbook in terms of future trends addresses the need for inclusion, opportunities, right? You give me an opportunity, you can turn a problem into an opportunity real quick. And I think that we uncover these opportunities through really culturally inclusive practices. Dr. Holston wrote an entire book, chapter on career counseling, just specifically with Latinx communities. And we wanted to say in terms of what does the future look like? Well, we want to create a stronger sense of belonging for Latinx students to increase their sense of belonging to universities and college counseling centers. Universities and colleges can promote programming that is really directed towards dismantling the negative experiences, the trauma, the misconceptions of counseling. I talk to a lot of people and specifically with Latinx families, where they're kind of closed off to counseling. They may not even know what counseling is. We're very relational as Latinos and Latinas. We're relational people, but we're a collectivist community, which says we don't turn to counselors, we turn to ourselves. And I think that from a future perspective, we want to normalize counseling, like normalize the fact that you can go to counseling and you can flourish and you can do better. So there are many psychological struggles between going to the university or going to the workforce. I think that that's another critical area in terms of my own future research, which is how do we do that? And even for, I have two daughters, right? And I want them to aspire, into the sciences, into engineering, into a place where they feel their identity is part of who they are and they can excel based on that, into areas of study where it hasn't been traditional to have Latina young girls be in and pursue science, engineering, mathematics, and not relegate to just an identity of, well, I'll just be a homemaker. I'll just do what my cultural framework says. No, I want my daughters to aspire as Latina women and break barriers. And I think this is where me and Dr. Johnson really come together, given her advocacy for women, where we both believe that stereotypically, these are not fields that Latina young girls go into. And I think that that's a future trend that I want to specifically look at and recognize, that they're psychologically tied to their Latina cultural value system, which promotes, again, collectivism versus individualism, which is, again, contrary to our Latino and Latina value system. The impact of mentoring programs, that's another area that is critically important, in my opinion, that we have mentors that, well, first we need the people there, right? We need more Latinos and Latinas in the college for them to do that. But the mentoring piece is a critical piece. Like, I can show up at a place in schools that I visit and talk to them about my personal experiences, how I overcame this and overcame that. And you plant the seed, Dean Knapp. You say, this is what I've done, but take your focus off me. It's about you. And I think that narrative can be very helpful for universities to continue to connect, continue to foster open discussions about cultural identity and what it means to a person's aspiration, career aspirations, personal aspirations. Like, this is what we want to do. And I think that's a future trend for me, at least, and it's a really important one because it goes right here, goes to my core. So,
yeah. Well, listeners, once again, the book is Latinx College Students by Dr. Maldonado and Dr. Johnson. If you want to check that out, that'd be great. And just respecting your time, I need to wrap it up. But before we do, though, there's so many. I mean, I heard like 18 different directions we could have gone with this conversation. But to tie it up, though, what are some final thoughts that are either on your heart or mind that you'd want to leave with the listeners about this whole topic? Both of you, whichever wanted to go first.
I want to just jump in and challenge our readers and challenge our listeners to do the work. Look inside at any biases we have and read this book and turn those biases into action, into reflection, into passion, something that we can work with to improve recruitment and retention and the belongingness of Latino males and the Latinx populations in schools all across the board. We want them to graduate. We want them to succeed and feel like they're making a difference in the way that we want them to go out into the world and make this world theirs. And so we hope that this book is going to be as enriching for others as it was for us to read and to encourage writers to participate in and to edit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I certainly agree, Dr. Johnson. And I think this is also a textbook that can be a solid teaching tool as well. Like, I recognize that there are many people that know very little about this community. So the book can be used as a teaching component for persons that want to be counselors and understand that there is a complexity regarding gender differences, gender socialization, and we can counter that by family is so important for Latinx communities. Providing outreach, like universities, I know many times where I've provided outreach, just going into the community and saying, here we are, you belong to that college, really? Oh, wow. So you integrate family, right? It's not the individual, it's the family perspective. Doing family workshops, integrating counseling modalities like ecological counseling, right? That's super important, that counselors in training can learn, can understand, and God willing, can make a part of their framework. And I think that's a challenge and also an opportunity. So I put those together and say, let's move forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both so much for being with us today. We really appreciate you having the time to come here on the Mental Healthy Podcast. And once again, listeners, check it out, Latinx College Students by Dr. José Maldonado and Dr. Adrianne Johnson. Thank you for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
It's been an honor. Thank you for having us.
We appreciate
Well,
it.
thank you so much. And listeners, please join us again next time on the Mental Healthy Podcast. We look forward to having you. And thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mental Healthy. If you want to hear more episodes, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts and head to linktree.com/mentalhealthypodcast for all of our social media platforms with the latest mental healthy content. If you have a story to share that relates to what we discussed in this episode or any other episode, please contact us at mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. That's mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.